Hey, Mr. Grumpy Gills. When life gets you down, you know what you gotta do?
I don't want to know what you gotta do.
Just keep swimming, just keep swimming, just keep swimming, swimming, swimming. What do? We swim, swim.
Dory, no singing.
Dory. I love to swim in.
Dory.
When you want to swim, you want
See,
to
I'm gonna get stuck now with that song. Now it's in my head.
Sorry.
Welcome to Successful Dropout. This podcast is for the outliers, the innovators, the rebels, those that dare to dream and act on their dreams. I'm your host, Kylan Ginger. Join me as we find out what it takes to drop out, grind, and succeed. What's up, fam squad? I've got some pretty exciting news. If you listen to the podcast much, you know we've been building a pretty vibrant community of truly extraordinary people who have committed to an unconventional route through life. The Successful Dropout audience has been growing a lot, and I get a lot of people reaching out to me now with all sorts of questions regarding education, dropping out, opting out, entrepreneurship, resources, networking, etc. So much so that I decided it was time to create a more accessible community on Facebook so that we can all ask and answer these kinds of questions together, as well as celebrate our successes and encourage each other during inevitable adversity. So I've created a closed Facebook group, and I want to invite you to join it. If you follow Successful Dropout, if you resonate with our philosophy and want to help me grow this thriving community, go to successfuldropout.com/group. This community is for the rebels, the outliers, the innovators, the doers, and those who dare to dream and act on their dreams. If you're a dropout, an opt-out, if you're thinking about doing one of those things, if you're a parent, even if you aren't any of those things and you graduated school, I want to invite you to join. All that matters is that you resonate with the Successful Dropout philosophy and that you enter the group with the intention to provide value to the other members and not just receive value yourself. Again, go to successfuldropout.com/group to request admission. Once you're a part of the group, introduce yourself and get involved, and I'll see you there. What is up, Successful Dropouts? Get stoked because today on the show we have Sean Kim. Sean is the CEO of Rype, one of the world's leading language learning platforms, and the founder of The Growth List, a media company focused on helping you become your best self. He's also a columnist on Inc. and a contributor to Fast Company, Observer, Time, and a few other publications. But Sean, that is the intro I have for you, man. But tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you do.
Thanks for having me on the show, Kylan. Really appreciate your time, and for all the people listening, for your ears. I know there's a lot of podcasts and a lot of different medium outlets out there, so appreciate you guys sticking on here. I guess a little bit about myself. I am South Korean born, grew up in Canada, and given the context of this show, I attended a university called McGill University. They call it like the Harvard of Canada, which is never really a good sign. I mean, it's kind of supposed to be one of the best schools in Canada, but when you're ever putting in like the Harvard of whatever, it's never really a good sign. But nevertheless, it's a good Canadian school. It is kind of French and English spoken, and that's essentially where I went. And I had a really tough path trying to navigate myself, just like any other 17 or 18-year-old listening will have in the first years. I was supposed to be a doctor when I was young. That was my dream job, as many Asian families would like to direct their child towards. And, went into this kind of art and science category, which some of the listeners might be in. And, that goes to show that I was clearly not sure, because when you're in art and science, you're kind of like contradicting one another, And eventually I got into more of the business side of things and never really got the grades that I wanted, was never really an exceller, and just really felt very vulnerable and a little bit self-conscious because a lot of my friends who were coming from private schools and had really great, family backgrounds were succeeding kind of in this academic setting that was put forth in a school like McGill University or any academic institution. And, eventually within my third year, which is beginning of fourth year, I ended up dropping out of university. And as you can imagine, coming from a conservative family where I was supposed to be a doctor or a lawyer, ended up switching my profession, switching my career path, dropped out of university, and ended up booking a one-way ticket to Argentina shortly after. And we can go into that story a little bit, but that's kind of how my beginning journeys of dropping out and finding my own path to where I am today started.
That's awesome, man. And I think you hit on a lot of great points there. We get a lot of, emails and communication from listeners actually who, very similar situation with at least their, I'm just trying to think. There's two specific people I've been talking to just this last week about, they're in college right now and their parents are pushing them towards more of the sciences, either sort of like engineering or towards, the medical profession in some way. Because it's a good, solid career, but at the end of the day, it's not something they really want to do, and they're sort of torn between this. Do I please, just do this to please my family and friends because they're going to be super pissed off if I drop out and go, I don't know, work at a restaurant for a bit while I try to figure out what to do with my life, and so there's this decision they have to make. So I think your story really aligns well with that. So I'm really curious to hear. If you could just dive in a little bit more to that process, right before you decided to drop out, what was sort of the straw, I guess, that broke the camel's back there? What made you really decide to take that step, and how did that go over with your parents? And then why Argentina? I'd love to go into that.
Yeah, I'd love to share that story. It's definitely got some interesting backfalls, but in terms of the situation that I was currently, that I was in my end of the third year, kind of beginning of the fourth year. It was more during the summer when I really made that final decision. Mm-hmm. And I've been there for over a year at that point. So in my second year, I was really struggling to figure out what path I wanted to go into. My parents were spending over $20,000 to $40,000 per each academic year trying to support my education. And here I was trying to figure out even what path I wanted to go to. I was switching all these different degrees, which set me back a couple of years. So that's like tens of thousands. So I felt this guilt, right? It was a lot of guilt. But at the same time, I knew that, at least my mindset at that point was whatever degree I'm going to get is probably going to limit me to the jobs and the future that I want to have, and even the amount of money that I can make or the happiness. So there was like a lot riding in this. And now I know that a lot of that can be banished, and you can reinvent yourself, and you can do all the things that you want to do without that degree. But at that point, I was so feeling stuck, and essentially I didn't really see a clear vision, a clear light at the end of the tunnel like a lot of my friends did. A lot of my friends were looking into going to big corporations. They had like a step plan of what they wanted to do, how much money they want to make. And I was like, my God, like, how long have you guys been thinking about this? Because clearly, we grew up in the wrong family, or, I was missing part of this education system. So I felt very lost, felt very lonely in a lot of ways. And really when that light spark hit me was when I started my first business. So my first business, and I'll fast forward this just because that's not necessarily the tipping point of how I dropped out of university, but my first business was selling these student cards because I was completely broke at the time. And at Quebec, and you need to speak French in order to get some sort of a job, even like a minimum wage job. You need to be able to converse in the language. And none of my friends, nor did I know how to speak it. So eventually what I had to do was, I was spending some money and I wanted to save money, and I knew a lot of other students did. And what I did was I created this student pass, kind of like a student price card. I don't know if you guys have that in the States. I know people in Canada will probably know about it. Mm-hmm. But essentially it was a free card that you can get from us. It was called Totem Pass. And what I started to do was I handed out about 10 or 15, I believe up to 20,000 over the past in the span of a year. And it was distributed all around McGill and all the different students around Montreal. And then I went to all these local stores like Burger King and Subway and Dairy Queen. And I said, listen, there's 20,000 people that have access to these cards that we can communicate with. If you guys give us a discount and some sort of a payment, we'll be able to actually get you guys more of these customers exclusively, and they won't go to your competitor. So that was kind of my first way into the business. And I obviously stumbled into it. It was kind of accidental, and that didn't make me too much money, but it was a fire that really hit me, where I said, you don't have to rely on a degree. You can kind of make up these rules on your own, which is really more my personality growing up, and you can make a good living out of this. So that eventually led me to, forge my own path and start exploring all these different ideas. And what happened was I got into this leadership / entrepreneurship program in Canada called the Next 36, where they select 36 of the top quote unquote young leaders from Canada and from these top institutions. And they give you about $100,000 mentorship and some resources to start your own business. And, I was balancing school at this time and while also doing this program and starting a business, and it started to get pretty serious. And that's really when I had a decision to make. And I said, do I take this chance where I have resources, I've got good mentorship, I've got good partners, and, either pause or leave school to take this opportunity? And it was tough, man, because I couldn't talk about this kind of stuff with my family. None of my friends really understood what I was going through. A lot of them were going through the traditional paths of going into big corporations.
Right.
So I was kind of left on my own to decide on really what my gut was telling me. And it was probably one of the hardest decisions that I had to make, but I did it. And unfortunately, about 4 months later, the business failed. And what I was left with was no degree. And I also moved from Montreal to Toronto at this point to be closer with my partners. And this is where everything was happening. So I had no job. I had no degree. I had no friends at this point because it was a completely new city. And I definitely did not have any money. So this is going to be a longer story, but there's a context to this. So what happened was I had to prove myself that either I could go to the degree, go back to that, admit to my family that I was wrong, and get them to pay another $20,000, which is ridiculous.
Tough.
Which is very tough, right?
Yeah.
Or what I could do was figure out a way to go to New York, which has always been my dream city to go to. So I ended up hustling my way and ended up getting this product manager's job. And it was a good paying job. I think it was paid about $80,000, and didn't have a degree, nothing like that. But because they liked my entrepreneurship style and my previous business, I was able to get my way in there. So I filled out my visa. I paid about $2,000 for the lawyer fees and did all of that out of my own pocket. And at this point, I signed away my lease. I had a place in New York, didn't have a place in Toronto, packed up all of my stuff, took a bus to the borders because I could barely afford the airlines at this point, and they turned me down.
The job turned you down?
The border officers in the U.S.
The border officer turned you down. Oh, no.
So at 4 a.m., they made me go take a Greyhound back to Toronto, and I didn't have any place to stay. So I had to, this is like 5 a.m. by the time I got back, or 6 a.m. And keep in mind, I took away my lease, right? So because I knew that I was going to New York, I signed away and subleased my place in Toronto. Somebody was already living there. I was homeless at this point. So the first thing I could do was I booked a room in a hostel just like nearby in downtown, and just started like freaking the hell out. I had no job at this point. I just got turned down by the border. So now I was permanently in their file, and it still am by this point. And no degree. I was not even talking to my family at this point, no friends. And I just had no freaking clue. And I just filled out my first business. So it's basically one of the lowest points in my life at this point. And I was like 20, 21 years old, like no knowledge of whatever future that I could have. So eventually what happened was I was able to find a friend of mine that would allow me to crash at his couch. And shout out to Elliot if you're listening, or eventually you're listening, for that help. And spent about 2-3 months just scrounging around trying to find these small little consulting gigs just so that I can be able to pay for my own food and be able to survive. And I did have that one inkling of hope, right? Which is that the border officers may have rejected me for this specific visa, but my job and my employer was still aware. They were still looking to bring me on, at least at this point. Mm-hmm. So the first thing I did when I got back was I called them and I said, listen, this is what happened. I got rejected from the visa place and from the border. What can we do? So we started exploring all these options. And a week later, they called me. They said, listen, we got to fire you. We can't make this work. We had, it's going to take another couple of months. We have all this. So that was the inkling of hope that I had to be able to make it through, because at least my job at the company, that they'd raised a lot of money, so they would at least be able to help me out, even though this visa got rejected. And that got turned down. So at this point, I had nothing, like literally nothing. I spent $2,000 in my visa fees. I already paid the down deposit for my apartment in New York, signed away my lease in Toronto. I was living on the couch without a job, without a degree, without any friends, and basically with no family help as well. Because it was a very awkward moment at this point in my life with my family relationship. Mm-hmm. So I had about $1,500 left in my bank account at this point. And this is with my credit card bills as well. So not cash. This is like credit card limits that I had. And I'm trying to think about exactly what was the inclination of me of getting from Toronto. But eventually what I was able to somehow come to a realization that, at this point, I'm paying Toronto bills, I'm paying Toronto food, and all these bills were stacking up because Toronto's not a cheap place to live. And
right.
For some neurotic reason, I convinced myself that living on the other side of the world, I think I read like a book or like an article from Tim Ferriss or one of these guys that were living the nomadic life. And I said, like, at this point, what do I have to lose? Like, I have literally nothing. I have no money. I'm paying expensive fees that I would normally not have to pay in a third world country. And that led me to go to Buenos Aires. So I booked a one-way ticket, and I think the ticket itself was like $500, $700. So I had about $800, $700 left to spend. And the reason why I chose Buenos Aires, which is interesting, is back in those days, and this is about 4 or 5 years ago, not too long ago. Back in those days, what they had was a currency arbitrage where you could exchange, where the official market, $1 US, was worth about 8 pesos. But if you were able to bring cash and US cash into the black market, and it sounds very sketchy, which is you go to this street in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and people will be yelling out "cambio, cambio, cambio," and which means change in English. What you do is you go to this alleyway and you can exchange US dollars for Argentina pesos. And these guys use it as a hedge, like the way we use gold or silver. And what you can do is, as I mentioned, $1 in the US would be normally worth 8. But what you can do in these black markets is $1 you could get back, and you could get back about 15, sometimes up to 16 pesos.
Wow.
Which is ridiculous. That's how messed up the government was back in the day, and still is. So on the first day, I literally doubled my money on my first day of coming into Buenos Aires, which is the only reason why I went there. There's only 2 countries that do that: Buenos Aires and Argentina and Venezuela. And Argentina doesn't do this anymore, but Venezuela, I just didn't want to go there. But I was able to double my money, pay my first month rent, and that's essentially the reason that got me to Buenos Aires, Argentina, and just to really switch up my life. And obviously the living expenses were a lot cheaper there, but that's kind of how I was able to go from dropping out into living my life in Buenos Aires.
Good Lord, man, that's a heck of a story. I love
It's
it.
long. It's long, but it's all kind of it all kind of comes together. There's a reason why I went to Buenos Aires.
No, and I love it, and I want to continue. So first, let's pause right there. Okay, you're in Argentina, but you open up a lot of different paths. We could take here. One thing I wanted to mention is you mentioned that you were able to, even though you didn't end up being able to keep this product manager job in New York. It's interesting that you said you were able to get that because they saw your entrepreneurial tendencies and experience just building your first company, which was, again, did you say Totem Card?
It was Totem Pass was my
Totem
first
Pass.
college business, and then Needle, which was a graphic designer marketplace, was the business that I started to drop out of university, which failed in like 4 months.
Okay, so Needle. And so we talk a lot about auto credentialing or self credentialing on the show. I don't know if you're familiar with the concept, but essentially the only reason that people go to college, when you really break it down, is for that credential, for that degree that sort of signals to the rest of the world or the workforce, your future employer, that you are qualified to basically do this job. And we really encourage people in different ways to build their own credential outside of college. And one of the great ways is to start your own business. And you sort of build this portfolio of experience in business that you're able to get, a good job like you experienced with. And so I just wanted to point that out because I thought that was key. But the other thing you'd mentioned a couple times, which I'd love to go into, just because this is something I know a lot of our listeners struggle with, is having a lot of interests. Or, you mentioned that you grew up with peers who seemed to know, they had sort of this tracked plan. They seemed to know exactly what they wanted. I've never had that personally, so I'm right with you. I understand. I've always been jealous of some of my peers that seem to know from a very early on exactly what they want to do and have this like 10-step plan for their life. It just seems like life would be a lot simpler sometimes with that. And so I'd be curious to hear any advice you'd have for our listeners who are struggling with this, who are struggling with having, too many interests. They're young. And I know at like at 18 years old, sometimes you feel like you have to have your whole life figured out and have to settle on one interest right away. And I'm just curious to hear, what you think about that. Any advice you'd have for people sort of maybe experimenting or discovering what they should do with their life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think if you're referring to the listeners out there that are maybe still a little bit young, they're just entering college, or they're still about to finish high school, or even if they're just finishing college, right?
Yep.
I think it's okay to be in that experimenting mindset, because you're right. I mean, you don't know at all really what's out there. And the only way to really figure it out, unfortunately, is to be able to nibble and dabble in these little stages. Now, there's a lot of people that would say you shouldn't nibble and dabble and you should go all in on one thing that is really working. But in order for you to even get to that stage, you have to be a massive experimenter. And more importantly, you have to be self-aware of what your unique value is, or unique strength, or what I call a unique competitive advantage. And that takes a while to figure out. And it's a kind of a chicken and egg, because if you want to be able to figure that out, you need to be able to do all of these experiments on pursuing different passions, on working on different projects, and to be able to figure out these little things like, hey, can I work better with certain people versus others? Do I even want partners if I want to be able to start a business one day? For me, I realized when my first business failed that when I'm first starting out, I'm much better when I'm working alone, and then I bring in a partner in next. And that's something that I had to fail at multiple times in order for me to really understand that. So if someone is a very young stage right now, it is completely okay to be in this very open mind. In fact, I encourage it. And the reason is because there is a compounded effect that you will receive as you start to experiment, because one skill set or one lesson that you learn after pursuing one passion or one hobby, whether you fail or succeed, you're going to be able to take that with you in that next venture or the next project that you decide to work on, or even the next passion. And that could be small things like being able to be a little bit more self-aware on what you didn't do, or it could even be a specific hard skill set. Maybe you use some specific marketing tactics, or you built a relationship in this one industry or with this one venture, and now you can be able to leverage that and make this next venture, this next passion project a little bit more successful, a little bit more faster. So to me, that's really important for you, for people that are listening, to be able to be in that open-minded set. Now, if you're a little bit later in that stage, then you want to be able to reflect on the previous experiences that you've had, and really you want to avoid making previous mistakes. Now, depends what age we're talking about. You could be 40, you could be even 50, and still be in that beginner mindset. But when you're at that 25-year-old stage, you do have some experiences that you can reflect on that would allow you to narrow down your scope just a little bit, right? Whether that's a work experience that you've had, whether that is a course load that you took in college, whatever that might be, it should be getting a little bit more narrow. But I think when you're 18, when you're 16, it's totally okay to broaden your scope, because that's the only way you'll know what it is that you truly are passionate about.
Dude, I think you got it dead on. I loved what you were saying about transferable skills. That's something we talk about a lot. Career capital. I think the biggest thing is we're also tempted, and I get a lot of communication on this, to feel this pressure to have everything figured out when we're so young, and I know a lot of you guys are tempted to really just stay in your head and try to figure it out in your head, when really you just need to go out and make a list of some of the interests you have and start pursuing them. Mix and match, pursue two at the same time, or even just focus on one. But like Sean was saying, the more experience you build up and the more you do, the more you're going to learn about yourself, which will allow you to have a better idea of which direction you should head. And one thing you mentioned, Sean, was competitive advantage, and just generally understanding what you sort of uniquely bring to the table. I'd be curious to hear about what you think some of your competitive advantages are, and some of the things, I guess, that you've just learned about yourself throughout all these different ventures and different things you've done, just to give us sort of an example of what people should be striving to learn about themselves.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I can give you a more specific example. There's a ton of different ways that I think we have our unique advantages. That could be from a purely hard skill that you may have. It could be a soft skill. It could be a relationship base you have. But one example that I personally learned about myself is on an entrepreneurship level, which I know a lot of your listeners are interested in. I've personally realized that I'm really good, and the position that I put myself in needs to be from more of a brander and a promoter and a marketer, more of a evangelist of something that I need to be selling, or something that I need to be putting my name under. That's really what I'm best suitable at. I'm not the most efficient or the most effective, let's say, operator, even though I can be dangerous. I'm not technical at all, and I've had mistakes of mine trying to convince myself to learn how to code when that's not in my natural DNA. But I've convinced myself, because of the pay grade that you can get, coming from, you don't even need a university degree. So I convinced myself, I don't have a university degree, maybe I should get into coding. All these people are trying to start their own companies, and it aligns, right? Because you can start your own company, and if you know how to code, you don't need to partner. Like, logically, it makes sense. But when you dig deeper, at least for me, I was self-aware enough to know that where my unique skill set is, and where I need to continue learning and developing and to grow and to really invest my time, energy, and blood and sweat into, is to become a better evangelist, to become a better promoter. And that means I need to have a complementary partner, right? So when you know that, when you know your unique advantage, when you know your unique skill sets, that answers a lot of follow-up questions that most people run into, which is, what type of partner do you need to get? What type of, how many partners do you need when you're first getting started? And what are the gaps you need to fill to make sure that these people are filling in so that you can go out there and make sure that you're putting your unique competitive advantage to its fullest potential. Because when you don't know that, people are always concerned about what type of partners they should get, what type of businesses they should even start. So, that it answers so many questions once you can identify that one unique competitive advantage, and you can have multiple, right? So even for me, on the type of businesses that I want to start, I'm not going to start a artificial intelligence or a machine learning company that involves a lot of technical knowledge, because that's not my unique skill set. And if I want to be the CEO of a company that's really backing this, then I need to be able to, understand the product inside and out and learn and be able to talk about it better than anyone else. So I think that's kind of how I was able to find it. And really the how is really just being able to experiment again. So I don't think I would have been able to find out just in my first year of starting out. So it does involve a little bit of tripping and kind of being able to figure out and testing out what it is. But once you find that, and once you really are self-aware of what you're uniquely best at, a lot of these questions that are unanswered for a lot of beginning entrepreneurs can immediately be answered.
Yep. Absolutely, man. I love that. And it is clear that that your strength is in marketing and evangelizing and stuff like that, in the branding. Just from doing a quick Google search on you and seeing, all your stuff, it's very clear that that's your strength, and you've done a really good job at that. And so it's neat to see that in action and how you've sort of settled into that. I'm probably more the exact opposite. I'm more of the operator type, the systems type, and I love to get into the little details and techie stuff, and a lot of the times the big picture, marketing, branding stuff, it doesn't come as naturally. So, but I love the story, man, and so I'd love to pick up now where we left off in Argentina. I'm really curious to sort of hear the rest of the story there. So, you had a couple businesses you started, one failed, you lost the job, moved down to Argentina, sort of doubled your money. Let's just continue from there. What happened next?
Yeah. So, at that point, I doubled my money. I had about, I started with $700 and I had about, I guess $1,500 left in my bank account. And at this point, I had to figure out how I was actually going to be able to make money. So when I first got into Buenos Aires, my mindset was not, let's stay in Buenos Aires. It was really, for me, a reset opportunity. And I realistically, in the back of my head, I knew that I had to go back. I was giving myself about a month because I was able to, and this is probably another conversation, but I was able to score a free trip to the Inca trails in Machu Picchu. And my goal was essentially to stay a month, go to the trip, and then come back to Toronto, so where I can, realistically figure out my life. And that would have been a rational, logical decision, right? You take a month off, reset, and go back. Being the idiot that I am, I that was not what happened. So this was a little bit accidental too. And what happened was essentially my trip to Inca Trail got booked in December. So it got postponed. So I would not have been able to afford going all the way back to Canada and then coming back. So just out of pure being able to save money, I was like, you know what? It's not like anything I have to go back to in Toronto. Why don't I figure out a way to actually make money and to pay the bills, even though I'm here in Argentina? Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to recall exactly how I got into this, but the way I got my first job was I used this marketplace of startups called Angel.co, now it's called. And I figured, you know what, why can't I just do this for getting freelance gigs or for consulting gigs? It's the same offer, but maybe in this case, I can work a little bit remotely. It's more results oriented. And I actually wrote an article about this. So you guys can check that on thegrowthlist.com. It was one of our most popular articles. Tim Ferriss retweeted it and he shared it to his audience as well. And it's titled How to Win 30 Consulting Offers in 30 Days. And it was a step-by-step process of how I was able to do it. And it's kind of like you kind of hack the system a little bit about on the way to do it. So you've got your information filled out, and the way the filtering system works on AngelList is they actually allow you to find companies that would allow you to hire remotely. They allow you to find contract gigs. And the beauty of it is you don't have to go through a regular application process, which takes probably 30 minutes to an hour to fill out per each application. And even now what they have, and I highly encourage you guys to check this out, is if you go to the job section and once you have your information filled out, it's literally a one-click process to apply to a job. Now you can add personal messages, which I recommend you do, which is just going to be like a copy and paste. So in a lot of these cases, it's a numbers game, right? For applying to jobs and all that stuff. I didn't really have that much to offer, to be honest with you. I didn't have these crazy professional experiences. I didn't have a degree. But what I was able to do was kind of hack the system. And I ended up applying to about 200, 300 jobs in like a span of 24 hours because I was desperate to find something. And that's essentially, I went back and forth and I was able to get all of these, dozens and dozens of these different offers that came to me. And more specifically, I at that point, I knew that what I was passionate about was not coding or building products or on a technical level, but it was marketing and content marketing and being able to help people grow their customer base. And luckily, by that point, I was able to figure that out. And after a little bit of negotiation, after a couple of weeks, I landed myself a couple of really good paying gigs that would allow me to work remotely. So a couple of factors into this. It was in the same time zone. I was in Buenos Aires. A lot of the clients were in Toronto and New York. And, each of these clients were paying me about $2,000-$3,000 per month to be able to help me with help them with their marketing. And, I had a couple of clients at the time. So financially, it was a reassuring way for me to be able to continue my journey. The only thing was I didn't have the confidence to think that this was possible. Like it felt a little bit too good to be true. Right. Where I was on the other side, I was like, something's gonna go wrong. Like one of these days, these guys are gonna be like, screw this guy. He's not in New York or he's not in Toronto, and this isn't gonna work out. And but eventually my confidence grew as time went by. I did a good job. I had to hustle extra hard, and that 1 month trip turned into 3 months. I ended up taking that trip to Inca Trail in Machu Picchu. That 3-month trip led me to go to Medellin, Colombia to continue what I was doing. And I guess 24 months have passed by and I'm still vagabonding and traveling every 3-4 months. So every 3-4 months I have been living in a different city, in a different country and running my business now. I'm no longer doing consulting, but now I'm running my company Rype, which is a language learning platform. And, we've got employees from all around the world as well. So it's just been a journey, man, just being able to live this kind of life. And it's really just been a mindset shift for me. That's really what it was. I wasn't doing anything special. I wasn't any smarter than anyone. I don't even think I was a born entrepreneur in a lot of cases. A lot of it just came out of being able to rise up in a tough situation and be able to have the inner confidence and to be able to experiment with everything possible until one thing works. So generally I would do 20 or 30 different things. None of them will work. But if one of them works, then it's something that you can really apply. And that applies for anything in your life, right? For your business, for maybe even your relationships, for any learning that you're doing. So that's kind of how I got to where I am today.
That's amazing, man. I'm curious, how do you think pressure played a role or plays a role in that? I mean, it seems like I just released an episode talking about a time just last year when there was a lot there's been several times in my life when various forms of pressure, a lot of times it's financial pressure, the things I'm doing aren't really working out. It causes you to become all of a sudden more creative, to explore a lot of different options. And, just talking strictly financially, some of the times when I've experienced the most pressure are the times when we've made the most money. I'm curious, to hear, do you think pressure plays, a role in that at all? Do you actively try to keep or apply any sort of pressure in your life to sort of keep the spark alive? You kind of know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I totally do. And I think pressure is such an important factor to really understand if you are an entrepreneur or not. I know a lot of people listening may not be completely sure. And I think entrepreneurs can be made. I don't think they're born. Like I was not a born entrepreneur. I know I just interviewed Tom Bilyeu, who created a Quest Nutrition, which is now $1 billion company. And he's the first one to say that entrepreneurs are not born, but they're made. So I don't necessarily think that you have to be a born entrepreneur, but I think pressure will tell you a lot about how good of an entrepreneur you can be. And if you look at the best entrepreneurs, if you look at the best founders of companies, not number twos, but number one CEOs of companies that really have done well, these guys eat pressure for breakfast, lunch, and dinner like it is a bowl of Cheerios. Like, it's ridiculous the amount of pressure, and that takes muscle, that takes building, that really takes some mental training. But the real way to know if you're going to be a successful entrepreneur over the long run, I think mentally, if you really want to play this game, is to reflect back on how you were able to handle the biggest pressure. And there's two ways to go about it, right? Either you cave in and you decide to get a job, or you decide to fall back, or you decide to give up, or you quit, or that moment, that experience of struggle makes you even stronger. And it's more of a crafting of a diamond that creates that toughness, right? Diamonds are only created under pressure. And I think that's the way you really want to look at it. And I realized that when I was at my worst moment, when I got rejected from the US border and I had nothing, I was actually so fired up. I wasn't happy about it, but I was so motivated because it was a survival instinct that I had. And for me, that's really what reassured me not to go back to university. That's what reassured me not to go back and live at home. That's what reassured me, not to stay in Toronto even, because of the inkling moment that I had where I was able to rise above the struggles, rise above the difficulties. And I think that's a lesson that anyone can listen to take is can you handle pressure? And you can learn pressure, but think about, if you're ready to be an entrepreneur, think about whether you can handle that real-time pressure or not, and think about an experience or a moment in your life when that's happened, and how did you react? And that's really what allow you to know if you can be a really successful entrepreneur over the long run.
Yeah. Yep. Totally agree. I mean, do you think that the ability to handle that pressure, do you think that can be learned as well? I know with some people, it tends to sort of roll off their shoulders. They seem to handle a little bit more pressure comfortably, more naturally, than others. But, I'd be curious to hear in your opinion if you think that can be learned, or, over time as you deal with different seasons of pressure, making the conscious decision to still strive forward, still keep going, not to quit. If you can become more and more comfortable, and if that can be sort of learned as well.
Yeah, I think anything can be learned. I'm definitely a component of the growth mindset, and that, as I mentioned, entrepreneurs, I think, can be made. So even if you're not at that stage right now, I think you can definitely have these experiences, and maybe you'll falter at one moment, but as you continue to develop your muscles in terms of getting used to these pressures and these difficulties, you can certainly come out of it. And I think this is honestly why I think immigrants are one of the best, most successful, and some of the best entrepreneurs that are out there, because they come from backgrounds where their families had nothing, and this experience of being able to be under pressure and to have these difficulties and to come out of it is something that's just like a natural muscle building process for them. And I'm going to offend some people here, but there's people that have been spoon-fed, or they've got wealthy families, or old money as they call it.
Totally.
Those tend not to be the best entrepreneurs because they expect so much out of something. So when something gets hard, they either give up. So I'm not saying that people can't learn to face these adversities, but if your backup plan is just to use your daddy's money or your mommy's money and just to be able to live, and live comfortably, then you don't give yourself the opportunity, or you don't put yourself in the situation to become a better entrepreneur, to be able to handle pressure better. So that's why I think the people that are already able to handle that pressure or come from that background have a natural advantage of being able to handle pressure better, and eventually to be able to become a better founder and an entrepreneur.
Yeah, Gary Vaynerchuk specifically comes to mind when you talk about that.
Yeah.
Curious, your trip to the Inca Trail in Machu Picchu, when you say that, did you just kind of ride the bus to Machu Picchu, or did you actually hike the trail to get there?
Yeah, I had to hike the whole trail, and man, I was not prepared. I had shorts on, and like I think I still have mosquito bites from like 4 years ago. One of the best experiences I had in my life, and that is a pure example of what it means to struggle and to have that amount of pressure, and to be able to see the fruits of the view of Machu Picchu as a result. So
Yep.
it was one of the best experiences I've ever had. Have you been?
Yeah. We this was 5 or 6 years ago, maybe more now. But yeah, we took a trip down there and backpacked the whole trail. It took a good week or so, and then yeah, like you said at the end, there's Machu Picchu, but it's absolutely gorgeous. I mean, some of the views are amazing, but you're also hiking this ancient trail, and some of the, I'm sure you remember, some of the parts of the trail, it's just cut out of the side of a cliff. I remember one part, there's like these stairs that you go down, just these ancient sort of stone steps that just go, it seems like forever. And all this stuff was built, a long, long time ago. And then at the end, you get to see the ruins of this ancient city, and it's just gorgeous. It's a really neat experience. We actually, our family, we do a lot of backpacking. We just got off a week-long trip, actually about 44 miles. And I always say it's a good analogy for life, backpacking. There's a destination, usually like Machu Picchu, or a mountaintop, or a lake you're trying to get to. You're sort of carrying everything you need for whatever length the trip is on your back. And a lot of the times you get lost. You sort of have a map, but sometimes it's not updated. You're going here, you're going there, but the destination always stays the same. Even if you sort of get lost sometimes along the way, or it takes a little longer, or somebody gets injured, which has happened too. But the destination stays the same, and man, it's always so worth it when you get to the destination. And typically your joy and your experience getting to that destination is elevated according to how hard it was to get there. The greater the struggle, it seems, the greater, the better it feels actually reaching your destination. But anyways, I know we're kind of coming close to the end of our time here. I wanted you to give us a little quick overview on Rype, and just do a little plug for that. I enjoy learning new languages. It seems like you really do. But I'd be curious to just hear about that, sort of the business model a bit, how that's doing, and maybe how people can get involved if they're interested.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's actually started while I was living in Colombia, which is the city and the country that I lived in right after Argentina, because at this point I was thinking, okay, I'm going to settle down a little bit. I might as well learn the language so I can start talking to girls, and I can start going out and having a little bit more fun. I knew zero at this point. And my work was still overflowing. I was still generating all of these clients, and I barely had any time. So, there's only two options that I really felt that I had that was right for me, which was either go into a school and pay, an enormous amount of money for like a 8-week intensive program where I would have to give up my work and sacrifice a lot of the things that I was doing because it's 9 to 5. You have to drive there. It's just a lot of inconvenient processes that were involved. And the other option was to go with like an application or a software program like, Duolingo or Rosetta Stone, or a lot of these were just completely non-interactive, right? My goal was to be able to speak with native speakers and to be able to really build a relationship, which is what 99% of people want to do, and the reason why they're learning a language. And I didn't really find anything in the market that allowed me to do this. So essentially what Rype is it was a way to scratch my own itch. And really what we offer is private lessons. So these are one-on-one lessons that you can take anywhere from around the world at any time. So you can take lessons 24/7 because we have teachers from all around the world. So it's specifically built for busy people like yourself and I, or anyone that's listening. Importantly, you can get the best value, which is one-on-one lessons, at an affordable price. So lessons can cost anywhere from $3 to $4 when you pay the monthly membership that we have. And for me, it was a way to provide that high quality value for less, and specifically targeting busy people which is really all of us at this point, that would allow them to learn a language, at a much more affordable price. And now eventually we're going to be looking into helping people taking this model and doing this for anything that they want to be able to learn, whether it's to get in better shape, whether it's to learn a music instrument, and anything else that they want to be able to do. So we're really excited about where this is going, and really for us, language is the first step to be able to do this.
That's awesome, man. Glad to hear it. Well, Sean, I've got 2 more questions for you before I let you go here. I like to ask every guest. The first one is just, do you have any parting advice, or what parting advice do you have for any of our listeners who are thinking of dropping out of college, perhaps to pursue entrepreneurship, but they haven't quite made that step yet? Just any parting piece of advice?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, if I had to do it all over again, given the resources that are now existing and solutions are getting cheaper by the day, starting a business is getting cheaper by the day.
Yep.
I would honestly not drop out without understanding exactly what it is that you're going to do. And more importantly, what I would do, and this is also for people that are working at a full-time job that wants to start a business, the same thing applies, which is to have a side hustle when you're taking classes or when you are working full-time. And that means you need to get up extra early, or that means you need to work a little bit later in the night, right? Stop watching Game of Thrones, stop watching all these Netflix shows, and even just watch one episode instead of watching 15 like I know a lot of my friends do, and use that time to get something going. There's so many resources that are out there that would literally allow you to make money on day one without investing, less than $100, and you can really get something going on the side. So there's so much time, but we need to be able to leverage most of it. And when you can have some sort of a proof or some sort of a revenue generating process involved, if you really want to go into entrepreneurship, that's really when I would say go and take that leap. Because I've made that mistake of just going through the leap and figuring out and hoping, and it worked out, sure, but for sure it could have been a lot sooner, than me just going to Buenos Aires and going through all these experiences. So what I would do is, if you really want to make sure and have a proof of concept to make sure that you're not kind of going through all these stages like I did, I would have a side hustle, get something on the side, try to get your first $1,000 up. And whether it's selling something on Shopify, whether it's just being able to sell your friends on something, have that proof of concept, and then let it build before you drop out. So that means you got to get started like today, if that's what you're considering.
Now, how about any parting advice for any of our listeners who have already dropped out and who are already on their entrepreneurial journey?
So these are people that already started their company?
Correct.
I would say patience. I would definitely say patience. And, sometimes I get that people don't have the luxury of being patient because their bill is $2,000 a month and they're only making $1,000. I get that. And hopefully the people that haven't dropped out yet will be able to take my first advice, which is to be able to make and have some sort of proof of concept so you don't get into that situation. But for the people that are just starting, I would be patient on a long-term and a high-level perspective, but I would be incredibly impatient and in a hurry on your day-to-day things. Does that make sense at all?
Totally. Yep. The drive and the urgency.
Absolutely. Yep. Be incredibly urgent. Work 24/7 to figure out exactly what it is that you need to be able to get up, and understand that it's going to take a long time. So don't make irrational decisions when you should really just be waiting it out, because the results will come after and those things will compound over time. And it's so hard when you're first starting up because things take a really long time to get started.
Yep. Love it, man. Well, Sean, what's the best way that people can connect with you?
Yeah, they can find me at Hey Sean Kim all around the web, and they can go to thegrowthlist.com to check out our publication, and also rypeapp.com. That's Rype with a Y, if they want to try out a 14-day free trial of our language lesson program.
Awesome. Well, successful dropouts, you are the average of the 5 people you hang around the most. And today you've been hanging out with Sean and Kylan, learning what it takes to drop out, grind, and succeed. For everything we talked about today, head over to successfuldropout.com and type Sean into the search bar, and the show notes will pop right up. And as always, stay hungry, stay foolish.